Dive into a world where every whisper echoes with secrets, and shadows hold stories that dare to be told. Unlock the door to a realm of suspense, where every turn unveils a chilling enigma that will leave you breathless. Embark on a thrilling journey through the labyrinth of the unknown, where each step echoes with the heartbeat of adventure. Join us on this riveting voyage of discovery, where every chapter unveils a new tale that will captivate your imagination. Stay tuned for more exhilarating stories. Chapter 1: The Asylum. That night, there was an enormous storm as Sara worked in the insane criminals asylum. She has been working here for 3 years. She knew this place perfectly. She used to work there by night to earn more money. When she arrived in the locker room to leave her stuff, everyone seemed alarmed. Usually, late-night work was easier than day work because patients were asleep. So all she had to do was to check on all the patients' room to see if everyone was there. But tonight, something was different and she could feel the tension in the air. "What happened?" she said. "8 patients escaped," answered Brad, the security guard, with a concerned look on his face. Sara immediately started to panic. What if he was part of the 8 people who escaped? She couldn't lose him again. "What are their names?" she asked. Teabag Fernando Sucre, David Apolskis, Lincoln Burrows, C-Note Charles Patoshik, John Abruzzi, and Michelle Schofield. At this moment, nothing made sense around her. It was as if everything had stopped. He was part of it. He was among the 8. She told herself that he had not the right to do that, not the right to leave her without thinking. Sara left the locker room, leaving Brad behind her. That couldn't be happening. What was he thinking about? What if something happens to him? "I have to find him before the guard does." She thought she arrived in the unsafe zone, not even knowing where to go. She was walking in the dark hallways, lightning going through the windows as the storm was still going. She started hearing steps that weren't hers. She tried to walk faster and faster, convincing herself that it was just in her head, but she barely had the time to turn around before she was roughly shoved against the wall. A stranger's chest was now pushing against hers. She didn't know what to do, but before she could scream for help, the man's hand covered her mouth. "I think I know who you're looking for," he whispered in her ear. Sara instantly recognized that voice. It was Teabag's. She was desperately trying to wriggle away from him, but she failed miserably. Teabag quickly put a hand in his pocket and grabbed a sharp knife. She could feel the cold metal brushing her neck's skin. At this moment she had stopped breathing. He stopped for a second, his fingers brushing her face and carefully parsing her hair behind her ear. "I won't try anything." Sara was frozen. She could barely breathe, but she knew she had to cooperate for him. Teabag was now leading her through the dark corridors of the asylum. They were now in front of Sucre's cell. The door was opened. Teabag quickly made his way to the sink, pushing it to the side, revealing a big hole in the wall. They probably had been digging this hole for months. Sara thought. Suddenly she started panicking. What if all this was just a trap? The man she was following was mentally ill after all, especially Teabag. He had been incarcerated there for the murder of 3 innocent women. "Now go ahead, pretty," he said, his finger pointing the hole behind the sink. What if I am his next victim? The simple thought of what was at the end of this tunnel was enough to make her want to go away, to run as fast as she could to get back to her car and go home. But she couldn't. There was no going back now. She crouched and carefully entered the narrow tunnel. At the end of it, she found a room she had never seen before. She wasn't alone in that room, for other men were already there. 2 of them were tied up to a chair. When her eyes laid on the 2 men, her heart skipped a beat. Michael was one of them. It was as if time had stopped. The thunderstorm seemed even louder than before. Next to him was Lincoln, his older brother. Lincoln had been incarcerated for torturing and murdering his boss, but all of this was just a setup. Lincoln never killed this man. He wasn't insane. He was just a pawn in the game he couldn't control. And then there was Michael. He pretended to be schizophrenic to get into the asylum and help his brother to escape. Sara could not recognize the 2 other men in the room. "Sara, we were waiting for you, darling." The stranger greeted her cheerfully. "How does he know my name?" "Don't be afraid. I won't bite you," he said. Sara didn't know what was going on. She scanned the room and noticed that there was a toolbox full of metal instruments. She didn't want to imagine what these men could do with those. Right now, She was thinking of the worst scenarios ever. She knew that their lives were in danger. "I see you're interested in those," the man said, walking around the toolbox and grabbing one of them. Sara, I'm in a pretty good mood today." He continued playing with the tool in his hand. "So I'm going to let you choose. Whose toe am I going to cut first?" he asked. Sara was completely lost. The world around her was falling apart and she was just a witness. Michael started wriggling on his chair. He couldn't speak because of the scotch on his mouth. "Hurry up, Sara, or I kill both of them," the man yelled. "I won't choose," Sara replied, trying to stay calm. "You what?" he asked. "I will not choose," Sara yelled. "Well, you give me no choice," the man said. A smile forming on his face, suddenly T-Bag, who was still behind Sara, took one of the instruments in the toolbox and hit Sara's head, causing her to fall roughly on the ground. She was knocked out when she woke up. She couldn't move, was tied up to a chair too, in front of Michael and Lincoln. "I know what you all were planning. You thought we were going to let you break out of the asylum this easily," the man she didn't know said. "Now you're all going to die," T-Bag said as he started laughing. "Why?" Sara screamed. "Because they said you were all going to die." T-Bag replied. "Who them?" T-Bag said, pointing at his head. He stopped a little before talking again. "We always wondered how death is going to feel like. Well, you're all going to find out." Chapter 2: The Nurse. Edward Scott was an old millionaire, very famous in Edinburgh. He was very happy in his life but was recently feeling weak, and was looking for a nurse who would look after him. One morning a big thunder woke up the old man in panic. When he opened his eyes, he saw the blurry face of a young woman who was comforting him. He put his glasses on and relaxed. The woman looked at him tenderly and said, "Good morning, sir. How did you sleep? Well, I hope." "Not that well. I dreamt that I died poisoned during a terrible thunder night. It was so weird, it appeared so real. But thanks for asking, Marilyn." "That's very kind of you," he said, smiling. "Oh, that's why you seem so lost," she said, fondling his cheek and smiling strangely. Marilyn gave him a hot chocolate with a piece of cake, and he sat in front of his favorite TV show. 40 minutes later, he heard some strange noises coming from the kitchen, and he remembered that Marilyn was cooking. She shouted from downstairs, "Do you want some onions in your soup, sir?" He was feeling too weak to shout, so he decided to go downstairs to talk to her. When he was in the stairs, he lost his balance but finally arrived in the kitchen. He surprised Marilyn, who was tampering with something for the soup. She let go of a little scream and dropped some soup on the floor. "You shouldn't be here. You must rest in your bed upstairs and let me work," she yelled. Edward got a little scared and said quietly, "I just wanted to stretch my legs and it's my house. I can do whatever I want, Miss O. Let me remind you that I'm the one who takes care of you, so you should just settle down, and speaking of that, I'm not even that well paid for everything I do." The old man sat on the chair. He was afraid and tired. He ate his soup quietly while she was looking at him, and decided to take a nap because he feeling too weak. While he was sleeping, Marilyn crossed the manor. When she arrived at the library, she saw a bunch of pictures. The first one was a wedding, Edward's wedding, with a young woman who seemed familiar to her. The second picture was quite damaged. There was still Edward, much younger, with a little girl. She had a vacant look and seemed sad. Marilyn looked at this photo for a long time. She was disturbed by this scene and was feeling angry. In all the next pictures, there was the actual family of the old man, but she never saw the young woman or the little girl again. When Edward woke up, she was staring at him, at her beside, holding a glass of water and a tablet out to him. She had a gray face and didn't say anything. He drank it all, and Marilyn started to ask him some questions. "I saw some pictures of your family in the library." "Oh yeah, my wife has been gone for 12 years, and my adorable children are in Australia. I wish them the best, but I miss them, though, you know. You seem to love them so much," she said with an ironic tone. "Did you leave your heritage to them?" "Of course." She kept staring at him with an angry face. She looked as if she was going to burst into tears. She went to the kitchen to prepare dinner for him, while he was still looking at the pictures. When the meal was ready, she brought it to him in bed. She looked at his face that was pale and very tired. "You look so weak, you should eat it all." He ate the whole meal and felt his eyelids very heavy, and while he closed his eyes, she said with a mysterious voice, Think of the harm you've done to me. Sleep well. Chapter 3: The Dark Side of Jo Duncan. Her name was Jo Duncan when she was 13. She had become partially deaf because of a car accident in which her mother died. Since then, she had a hearing aid so she could hear and talk. A year ago she turned 23. She had been a student in psychiatry since she graduated. It had always been her passion. She had always loved reading stories about serial killers to understand their behavior. To pay for her rent, she had to do a part-time job in a bar. One day she saw a guy in her class. She had never seen him before. He had brown hair. He was tall and thin. He was wearing glasses that covered up his black eyes. He had a badly cut beard and was wearing a black sweatshirt. He was sitting in the back, not talking, and anybody seems to notice him. She didn't pay more attention. Another day, she saw that same guy sitting in the bar where she was working. He was reading a book, but he often looked at her surreptitiously. She was intrigued now. She would see him every day on the bus, in her neighborhood, on the other side of the sidewalk, at the supermarket, and even at the cemetery when she went to see her mother. On October the 28th, she had a day off, so she went to the supermarket to buy some groceries. On her way home, she realized that she had not seen the guy all day. It was cold outside because of the wind. The sky was cloudy and the leaves were falling off the trees. After a walk she went home. She was tired, so she decided to take a nap. She took off her hearing aid and then closed her eyes. She woke up with a jolt. She put on her hearing aid, but it didn't work. Something felt wrong. She went downstairs and noticed the front door was not locked. She started panicking, and when she turned back, she saw the guy running towards her. He slapped her in the face, so she pushed him behind the door. She was paralyzed. Her heart started beating very fast. In the mirror, she saw the man coming slowly into the kitchen. When he walked in, she stabbed him in the collarbone and tried to run away. Before she could escape, he ripped a piece of her shirt. She ran for 20 minutes before she arrived at the police station. There she told everything to the police. A man was following her and was trying to kill her. A few hours later, investigators came back with the security footage of the school, the bar, the supermarket, and even of the cameras she had in her house. Inside the house, there was no trace of someone breaking in, but something did happen. There was a knife stuck into the wall, a piece of shirt on the floor, and more importantly, there was blood in the hall and the corridor. Jo and the police started watching all the footage, but then, what they saw was unbelievable. On all the videos, Jo was alone. In the psychology class, no strange man. In the bar, she was just staring at an empty chair. In the supermarket, no man either. But what happened in her house was even more horrifying. At the beginning of the tape, she was sleeping, but when she woke up, she broke her hearing aid and went downstairs and opened the front door. Suddenly, she turned back and slapped herself hard in the face. After that, she pushed into the void. Then, she ran to the kitchen, took a knife and hid behind the door. After a few seconds, she stuck the knife into the wall and ripped her shirt before running away. The police could not believe what they have just seen. Neither could Jo. She was white-faced and she was breathing very loud. She started being aggressive, screaming that it was not the truth and hit a policeman was trying to stop her. After that, another officer arrested her and put her handcuffs. A month later, she was in a psychiatric hospital. The doctors have diagnosed a mental disease. She was still saying that the man was there and was still trying to kill her. A few days later, a nurse found her dead in her room. On the tape, they could see her talking to no one, then beating herself to death. For a few seconds on the video of her death, they could notice a shadow in front of her. Chapter 4:2-1-3 Laura was going back home. It was Friday. The sun was already low in the sky and the moon was shining. She was walking to her car, parked at the back of the police station where she worked. She took her keys in her handbag, opened the car and got in. She turned on the engine and pushed the button to turn on the lights. No reaction. It might be a faulty contact. She thought, second try, not yet. She gave a little hit on the dashboard, and the lights turned on. Strange, Laura thought. I have done the verification in the car last week. There should not be any problems. She pushed the button 2 more times. Never mind. Now it works. I'll check tomorrow once at home. She put her handbag on the table and went to the kitchen. She took a piece of pizza from the day before and put it in the microwave. While it was heating, she went to her bedroom and kept her shoes off. Exhausted, Laura let herself fall on the bed and closed her eyes. "I must not fall asleep," she said aloud, as she was fighting against sleep. "I must be awake when Valentine will call suddenly." The sound of a bell made her startle. She opened one eye, trying to define the origin of the sound. "Second, ringing the microwave," she shouted. She woke up and ran to the kitchen too late. The pizza had burned the following day. Laura decided to bring her car to the mechanic. While the car will be controlled, she would go to the supermarket to buy something to eat. When she arrived at the hall of the shop, her phone rang. It was Valentine. Suddenly, she remembered that he had to call her yesterday, but she fell asleep before he called. The problem was she did not have any missing calls. She answered. "Laura," said Valentine, with a strange tone in his voice. "Yes, it's me." "Are you all right?" she asked. Yeah, it's okay. "Can I see you this afternoon? It's important." "Well, just let me check, but I think it's going to be good." Laura heard a strange sound from the phone. "Valentine, are you sure everything's okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. See you at 4 p.m. at the airport by Yip." He had hanged up. Laura put her phone in her handbag, thinking at the strange conversation she's just had. When she came back from the supermarket, someone yelled at her. She turned around and saw a little girl. She was running to Laura. "Please," she said. "Wait for me, I need your help." Laura stopped, and as the little girl was approaching, she saw she was crying. "Please, I need your help. You're my only chance," she said in a sob. "Hey, hey. Calm down. What is your name?" she said, trying to be the gently she could. She looked at Laura in the eyes. Big tears were falling down her cheeks. "My name is Rose," she said in a whisper. "Please, I need you." Rose breathed deeply. "What is your problem? I can't help you if I don't know what you're worried about." She seemed to have a dilemma, looking right and left every minute, and finally answered, "I can't tell you here now." She gave her a paper with an address and a phone number written on it. "Can you join me here tonight?" Laura looked at the paper Rose had given her, and when she wanted to say that she already had something to do this afternoon, Rose was gone later in the day. Laura was at the airport sitting on a sofa, waiting for Valentine. Laura watched her watch. 3:55 p.m. "In 5 minutes he'll be there," thought Laura. A voice from the loudspeaker said that a plane from Sydney had just landed. Suddenly, in the middle of the people coming from Sydney's plane, she saw Thomas. Shouldn't he be at the police station? He usually worked on Saturdays. Laura wanted to call him, but he won't hear her with all this noise around. But Thomas was standing right where she saw him, staring at her. Laura tried to tell him to come, but when she put her hand up, he had disappeared. She looked for him, but the only thing she saw was Valentine walking to her. She sat down and Valentine joined her. "Come with me," he said. "I can't talk to you here." Laura reflected. Why does he ask her to come to the airport if they finally have to go to another place? He could have given her another meeting point. Laura was fed up with secrets. Too many things had happened that day. At first, Valentine called her to say her something, and then a little girl she didn't even know needed her. Couldn't she have a normal weekend? Valentine had brought her in a corridor which seemed to be abandoned for years. "I don't have much time," Valentine begun. "What I'm going to say is very important, so please don't get it out of your mind." Valentine was talking to her. "Curly, listen. Thomas has been fired from the police. He is suspected of kidnapping policemen's kids and forcing them to give him information about what their parents are working on." Valentine was still talking to her, but Laura wasn't listening anymore. The puzzle took form in her mind. First of all, Thomas had been fired. Secondly, Rose needed her help. Finally, Valentine talked about kidnapping. Once she was back home, Laura turned on her computer and searched for information about Rose. She had forgotten her. Laura ran to her bag to take the paper Rose gave her this morning. "Where it is, I have might let it in the car." She went to the door and suddenly stopped. "No, I put it in my pocket," she remembered. She put her hand in her pocket. Nothing. Suddenly, the light came. Valentine, when they met, he brought her to her car, taking her by the hips. He knew she had met Rose. He was diverting her attention to take the paper with Rose's address. Now she might be in danger, her and her family. Laura decided to call Valentine. He knew something. Laura knew it. But Valentine was not the type of person who could hurt Rose. No, he can't. She took her phone and typed Valentine's number. "No answer, that's enough," she said at loud voice. "I call Thomas, and if he doesn't answer, I'll go to the police station and take pieces of information about Rose." She sat down and took her phone. "Thomas." A strange muffled sound came from the phone. "Thomas. Come on, let her to me," said a voice. It wasn't Thomas. "She will only bring you problems," continued the same voice. Laura knew this voice. She was trying to remember whose voice it was when a scream made itself heard. Rose. Without any more questions, Laura took her keys, her computer and her bag and jumped into her car. "I hope the lights will work," she thought. She put her phone on the passenger seat to listen to what was happening with Thomas and turned on the engine. On the phone, Thomas was shouting, "Let her go. She's not the source of your problems. You made them alone," the other voice answered. "Oh, you think so? Do you think I wanted to put her into this?" Rose was now crying. "Hope I'll be there on time." Once she had Rose's address, Laura drove to and parked in front of the door. The conversation ended when she passed under a bridge. She took her service gun and ran to the door. A scream came to her ears. It was Rose again. Laura punched the door and got into the house. The inside was upside down. Valentine was grabbing Rose by the arm, and Thomas was lying on the floor unconscious. "Let her go, don't touch her," Laura shouted. "What have you done to Thomas? If he doesn't make it, I won't hesitate to kill you." Valentine looked at Laura and forced Rose to get down on her knees. He finally put his gun on her head. "I've seen that you didn't fall into my trap," he said. "You're more clever than I thought." His eyes seemed to become bigger and bigger. He armed his gun and pointed it to Laura. She did the same. Valentine started laughing. He laughed and laughed louder and louder. Laura was scared, but she wanted to save Rose and Thomas. She knew since the beginning that Thomas wasn't guilty, but she didn't expect Valentine to be a psychopath. "Come on, you're not going to kill me. You could not even hurt a fly," he said. He took a step forward. Laura looked at him, at Rose, and finally at Thomas. "Put your gun down. You're mentally ill, look at you." His head was now red and he fired in the air while walking to her. Laura stepped back but touched the wall. She was stuck. Valentine laughed. "You said look at you. But now I think I can say the same. You're stuck. What are you going to do? Letting me kill you to have a beautiful medal of courage? No, I won't let you do this. You're going to suffer." At the moment Valentine was going to hit Laura with his gun, Thomas woke up and knocked Valentine unconscious with a plate. Thomas ran to Laura. "Are you all right?" he said, taking her by her shoulders. "Yes, I am, thank you," she answered. She had tears in her eyes. Rose, who had hidden behind the sofa during the whole scene, came to them and hugged Laura. "Thank you," she said. They sat down on the sofa, and Thomas called the police. Rose started talking about why Valentine came. "My dad is working on a secret project. He has to keep something safe thanks to you. This thing is still safe and my dad won't be fired." Laura smiled. "I think that I can show it to you." She woke up and ran to a room in a corridor. Suddenly she shouted, "It has disappeared." Laura turned around to look at Valentine. He was gone. She woke up and saw a paper where Valentine was. Something was written on it, a number 0-2-1-3, and a note, "Do not try to look for me where you think I am. I won't be there. When you will admit the fact that coming was a mistake, it's gonna be too late." Chapter 5. The Trapper. It was a dark week in Alaska. The country was snowy and it hadn't snowed for 2 months. It was winter and John had been alone in his small cabin for 3 months in the middle of nowhere. He was a strong and independent man who had been living by himself for over 10 years. He was trapping in the forest near his cabin as he would do every day. He always went on his snow bike to pick up traps. When he arrived at the end of his road, he realized something was wrong. There were some strange footsteps and his traps had been moved. However, he hadn't come for 2 days, so he was quite worried and surprised. Nevertheless, he was very tired because it was the end of his workday, so he didn't think a lot about it and just returned to his place. The next day, John woke up in a happy mood and wanted to work as hard as he could. He began setting new traps, but suddenly he remembered what happened the day before, and he asked himself whether it had been a dream. John decided to be sure of what he had seen. Consequently, he returned to the farthest trap, and that time there were many more footsteps and an abnormal amount of blood on the trap around it. John thought it might be an injured animal who was able to escape from the trap, even if he was trying not to get the bad side of it. He was still scared and decided to go back home as soon as possible. On the way home he saw a different trap which he had never set up. John felt insecure and in danger. When he finally arrived at his cabin he quickly locked the door and took a nap to forget what he had just seen. It was supposed to be a short nap but it lasted hours. He was woken up at midnight by a hard knock on his door. John jumped out of bed and quickly opened the door because it was about to break. When he opened the door there was nobody outside and the place was calm and quiet as always. The day after he was still shocked and wanted to check around his cabin if there were any signs. He found identical footsteps that he had seen yesterday around his traps. He tried to keep calm. He was looking at the forest and thinking about how much he loved that place. Surprisingly, he saw a human shadow far away in the woods. John ran towards his cabin and locked the door, and to be safe he put a wardrobe in front of the door. John reacted that way because he had never seen anyone in that place before. He was very scared, so he tried to free his mind and to stop thinking about it. John had been sleeping since sunset. Suddenly he heard identical knocks like the other time. He realized that something wrong was happening. He decided to go out. He took his time. In reality, it was the scariest moment in his life, but he knew that the police wouldn't answer at midnight. He had no way to protect himself. He just had his gun and his bravery. He was hesitating, but suddenly he opened the door and turned on the light. John checked around his cabin. He didn't find anything, just the same signs. The day after he decided to call the cops. When he finally arrived to dial the police number, he received a very scaring message. A strange man voice was saying, "I'm here to kill you. You're gonna die tonight." John panicked a lot, but he realized that he had lost his gun the night before. He walked around his cabin but he didn't find it. He concluded that he was in danger. Consequently, John decided to run away to the nearest city of Sitka, which was 4 hours away on the snow machine. He was ready to go 30 minutes later. He was going very fast on his snow machine. While he was in the woods he heard some noise. At a turning point he crashed into something. The shock was very hard. John decided to check what was under his snow machine. He moved some snow and suddenly saw a man's head. He directly recognized Richard Harrison's head, who was a famous murderer and psychopath who had escaped from jail 2 years before. Chapter 6: The Wedding. Leonard and Chloe had been engaged since Christmas. They were blooming. Their love story was almost perfect. They were looking forward to their wedding. They had planned everything. A beautiful and big party with all the people they loved. Leonard was tall with blue eyes and Chloe was a brunette. It was the day after a thunderstorm. The sun was coming back but the sky was gray and a rainbow came out. It was the day before their wedding. Leonard woke up and he was lying on the bed. When he turned round to look at his beloved, she wasn't there. He stood up and started to look for Chloe in the house, but there was no trace of her. He called her but her phone was still in the house. Event off. She never forgot it. Where could she be? Leonard started to panic. He decided to call Chloe's mom, Jane, whom he had total confidence in. Unfortunately, she didn't know where Chloe was, so she decided to join Leonard to help look for her. It was the day before their wedding. She would never leave without her phone. It wasn't just a coincidence. They were wondering if someone could have hurt her. They called Alice, Chloe's best friend. The first time Leonard called Alice, she didn't answer. The second time she did. "I don't know where she could be. I haven't had any news of her since she called me after she tried on her wedding dress," Alice stammered. Leonard thanked Alice before he hanged up. He felt something was wrong with Alice's behavior and explained his thought to Jane. He added then Alice was stammering and she was speaking as if she had something to hide. He remembered a past anecdote. When he had met the two girls, they had become good friends immediately. And a few weeks later, Alice had declared her love to him. But he was already in love with Chloe, so nothing ever happened between them. For Leonard, there was no doubt about it. Alice was involved into Chloe's disappearance. Maybe she was jealous of their love story. Jane and Leonard both decided to go to Alice's home. In the car they were stressed. What could they find there? They hoped that Chloe was okay, and that the wedding would happen. They finally arrived after a difficult drive. Leonard rang Alice's doorbell insistently, but no one answered. He started to lose his temper. He was really mad. He acted very weird, but it was certainly because he was very worried. No one answered, so he tried to open the door. It wasn't locked, so he entered. The first thing he saw was Chloe crying in Alice's arms. Leonard calmed down. He was reassured to see his love again, but still furious toward Alice. Jane reprimanded her daughter. She had been dreadfully worried because of her. She stopped rebuking and took Chloe in her arms with all her mother affection. Chloe was peaceful in her mother's arms, but when Leonard approached, she went back and started crying and panicking again. "But why did you leave?" Leonard screamed. "The wedding is tomorrow. What happened to you?" "Calm down, Leonard. She is just stressed. Everything is okay. You know, it's a very big thing to get married." Jane answered, trying to calm him down. "No, it's not okay. We were so terrified," he added. "What are you saying? You are terrifying. You are totally mad. I would never let my best friend be with a man like you," Alice answered furiously. Leonard looked at the three girls with a threatening look. He was mad as hell. He threw away the table with an extreme violence and opened the door. "I won't leave things like that," Leonard yelled. He slammed the door and left. Chapter 7. Mother. Emma Klein was an 18-year-old ordinary student. School. She was known as a nice and intelligent girl. However, at home, it had been more complicated since the death of her mother 2 years ago. The relation with her father had deteriorated. The only times they spoke to each other were to argue. He was very hard with her. She was feeling very lonely and not safe in the house. One day after school around 6 p.m., she was going back to her house. Her father, who was working very late, wasn't there. She was chatting with some friends on the phone when suddenly a message appeared. The number caught her attention. It was her mother's. She hesitated and decided not to answer, thinking that it was only a mistake. The day after, she received another message, "Won't you answer me?" Thinking that the number had only been redistributed, Emma asked who it was. The person replied very quickly, "You already forgot me. It was only a year ago." She was shocked and started to be very angry. "I do not know who you are, but this joke is not funny at all." "It's not a joke. Do you still take your medicine?" Her heart was going to jump out of her chest. Only her mom was knowing about her depression. Even her father did not know it. "Who are you? Stop right now. It's not funny. Have you been better since the accident?" Her face tensed. She didn't feel good. All the emotions were mixed. Drop dripped down her face. She was scared, panic-stricken, and totally lost. She was getting ready to answer when suddenly the door slammed. She went down but did not see anyone. The house was silent. Suddenly she felt a hand resting on her shoulder and jumped. "Relax, Emma. It's just me. You scared me, Daddy. I have a strange question to ask you. Do you still have Mom's phone?" "Yes, I kept it. It's in the boxes with all her other stuff locked up in the garage since the accident." "But why?" "No, nothing. Just forget it." The days passed. She was receiving more and more troubling messages. She felt as if it really was her mother. Even if she tried to convince herself that all this was not real, she could not stop thinking about her and her death. After several weeks, she began to get used to them until the day she received a message. "What are you doing in your room at this hour? Aren't you at school?" All of a sudden she felt as if she was being watched. She looked around her, through the window, but didn't see anyone. She tried to forget this message, but she felt unsafe. She first thought about leaving the house, but remembered that the phone was in the garage. She decided to go and check. She just wanted to finish with all this. It had not been opened since the death of her mother. It was dark and dusty, cluttered with old stuff. She hesitated a few minutes, took the key, opened the door, and turned on the light. What she saw in the back of the garage paralyzed her. A woman was sleeping in the corner of the room, covered with her mother's clothes. She did not try to understand who she was. She closed the door and called her father and the police immediately. Afterward, all passed very quickly. The police questioned the woman. For months she had been living in the house. In the day she was stealing food in the kitchen, taking a shower, and rummaging their stuff. In the night when they came back, she was going back to the garage. For months she had learned everything about this family and tried to get closer to Emma by sending her messages. Emma had lost all hope of seeing her mother again. It was as if she was losing her a second time. Chapter 8. A strange disappearance. They got dressed and got ready to go to Luca's party. It was 9:00 p.m. Sabine wore a blue dress and Lisa a red one. Alice was wearing black jeans with a white top. They arrived and were greeted by Luca. The music was great. The three girls took a drink and began enjoying themselves with the other guests. At one moment during the party, Lisa went to the toilet to freshen up. She felt like she was being watched. She thought for 2 seconds and realized it was maybe the effects of alcohol. During the party, Lisa and her friends saw a lot of persistent looks. But the most frightening thing was that they didn't know who was staring at them. After having fun, the girls left. It was midnight. The road was dark and thunder began to rumble. Alice, Lisa, and Sabine were alone in the city and were scared. They were walking without saying a word, and suddenly, they saw a light source that was coming up towards them at full speed. This light was getting more and more dazzling. The car was about to hit them, and loud frightening screams echoed in this lost place. The next day at dawn, a rescue team found Alice and Sabine lying in a miserable condition on the road. They drove them to the nearest hospital. Alice, who was awake on her stretcher, observed the room and saw Sabine. She looked quickly around her as if she was looking for someone. She called a doctor and asked where Lisa was, but he did not understand and asked her who Lisa was. Alice explained that they were three during the accident: Sabine, Lisa and her, but there were no traces of Lisa. She had disappeared. Wanted person posters were multiplying all over California. It had been 2 days since Lisa disappeared, and there still were no signs of life from her. Alice and Sabine met in the hospital room and began to think about who might have kidnapped her. The memories of the party reappeared. Lisa had talked about a boy who was watching her during the party. They had agreed not to talk to the police and find Lisa on their own. On leaving the hospital, they went directly to Luca's house. He surely had information about the boy. Sabine rang at the door and Luca opened. "Oh, hello. Girls, what are you doing here? We want information about a boy from the party." "Yes. I'm listening to you. Which one?" "He was wearing a cap and a large shirt." "You're certainly talking about Alex. I didn't invite him to my party. My friends and I find him weird." Alice and Sabine looked at each other. It was him. They needed his address immediately. "We need his address. It's urgent. Lisa disappeared. We think it's him who had kidnapped her," said Sabine. Surprised, Luca gave the address of this strange Alex. The girls rushed to Alex's house. They knocked on the door but no one answered. They tried to turn the handle. It was opened. Panicked, they entered without a word. There was no one in the living room and the kitchen. They went up to the room. Lisa was lying down. She was sleeping. Alice woke Lisa up. Lisa was shocked to see her friends in front of her. Sabine and Alice told Lisa to hurry to leave before being spotted. Lisa didn't want to leave. The girls didn't understand and tried to pull Lisa out. It was at that moment that Lisa shouted, "You don't understand. I'm in love with him and I want to stay." Chapter 9: Perpetuity. It was raining cats and dogs. A real flood had invaded the high school. I was lying in the sports hall with the students because the rain was blocking us in this place. The patter made me feel anxious and terribly alone. Suddenly I felt a hand shaking my arm. I let out a little sound. Shoo. It was my friend Ginny. Giant Jane. "Come to the restrooms with me," she whispered. Even if I was tired, she gave me no choice as usual. But if I had known what was going to happen, I would never have gone there. 2 minutes later, we were looking for the restrooms thanks to the lights of our phones. "I found them," I said. Ginny bumped into me and I followed her inside. "Give me some toilet paper," Ginny ordered. I heard her, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was focused on this door I had never seen before. "Hey Jane, are you listening to me? This door." I whispered. "What are you talking about?" Ginny asked me. "Did you know there was a little door just behind the washstands?" Ginny came out of her toilet and joined me, wondering how a simple door could be more interesting than herself. 5 minutes later, we were trying to unblock the padlock of the door with one of my bobby pins. After a big effort, the door opened, creaking and making Ginny start up with fright. "Don't make fun of me," Ginny shouted while I was laughing. "Go away from this place before it is too late," whispered an unknown voice. A guy was sitting on the floor looking at us with an empty look and pale face. "Oh my God. He is really cute," Ginny whispered in my ear. "What are you talking about?" I said. "He's totally scary, you know, I can hear you." The cute scary boy said, "Sorry. I'm Jane and that's my friend Ginny, and who are you?" 5 minutes later, we knew all about him. His name was Stanley Jones. He was 27 also. He had been locked up in this place at 17 by the janitor, Daniel's scary son. "Why? Because during all his school years, Stanley had made his life hell, pulling him down about his job as a janitor now. He had been here for 10 years and every day, the horrible man came to see him and beat him for what he had done. 10 years, what a monster, I said, crying. I'm calling the police, Jenny announced. Not so fast. A creepy voice said he had a gun pointed on us. He took our phones and closed the creaking door after him. Stop screaming, believe me. I have tried everything and there are no solutions. We are all lost, Stanley said 3 years later. We were still in that horrible place. Daniel's scary son visited us only to give us food and drink, and especially to beat us. We couldn't scream because the door was soundproof. Oh no, it's him, Jenny whispered, hearing the key opening the padlock. The door opened and he came in without the food and drink we were expecting. It's the end, you will never see me again. My career has just finished, goodbye. And he started to close the door slowly. What? Will you leave us here without food or drink? I said. Yes, I will. That's the thing, I couldn't move anymore. I could just hear Jenny's tears and see the door being closed forever. 3 days later I was alone. Jenny and Stanley were dead. I was hungry, thirsty, desperate, and the dead bodies of my friends gave off a disgusting smell. The worst was that I was too weak to stand up, and suddenly I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't feel my heartbeat, as if an unknown power was taking me to an unknown place. I was almost dead. It was near, so near it was now. Chapter 10. The Cursed Wedding. One night, in the mountains, John and Mary, just married, were on the road for their wedding night in a beautiful chalet. It was early autumn. The wind was blowing and the orange leaves were falling. This weekend was supposed to be the best one of their lives. When they finally reached their destination, an old woman opened the door and welcomed them. Hello, I'm Mrs. Roberts. I'm the owner. Please come and visit the house. I've prepared it especially for you. There is a large bedroom and a beautiful view out of the window. The young couple followed her with their dog. They were very happy with the chalet, and Mrs. Roberts was very kind, even if she was a little insistent. They had a very good night, but around 3 a.m., while they were sleeping, they suddenly heard strange noises like a door banging, objects falling on the floor, and mostly heavy footsteps. John and Mary got scared. They were a little confused. They decided to go downstairs to see what was happening. The dark, cold room was frightening. Mary switched on the light and they saw nothing. It was quiet and apparently nothing had changed. They might have dreamt. The next morning, when they woke up, the old woman was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Good morning, did you sleep well? She said. Hello. We heard strange noises during the night, as if someone had broken into the house. John answered. Oh, how strange, but you know, it's a very old house. Sometimes ghosts play jokes on us, she said mysteriously. The couple looked at each other. They were surprised. After breakfast, they noticed that their dog was missing. They hadn't seen him since the night before. They searched for it in the whole chalet, but it wasn't there. Mrs. Roberts, have you seen our dog? We haven't seen it since last night. Mary asked the woman. Your dog? No, I'm sorry, I haven't seen it, she said in a hurry. Later in the day, Mrs. Roberts went out to the garden. During her absence, John and Mary talked about the suspicious events of the last hours. I'm very worried about our dog Rocky. It has never disappeared like this before, Mary said. I hope we will find it before we leave tomorrow, replied John, talking about the disappearance. I can't find my wallet really. You know, this old woman looks suspicious. She is always snooping around. And this morning I found a button, pink like the ones on her coat downstairs. I bet it was her last night when we heard noises. I'm sure she stole your wallet, she exclaimed. Do you know what? Let's search in her room while she is in the garden. Then the young couple entered Mrs. Roberts' room and started searching for the wallet, or another clue. Suddenly, John noticed an irregularity on the floor. Under a piece of furniture, it was a trapdoor. Undoubtedly, this woman had secrets to hide. The couple opened the trapdoor and went down the cold, dark stairs. They were frightened. Their honeymoon had become very gloomy. The cellar was so dark that they couldn't see a thing. Moreover, a nauseating smell was floating in the room. John switched on a torch and what they saw horrified them. There was an amount of blood-stained bags, with dead bodies inside. It was all Mrs. Roberts' victims, and on a table, they saw their dog dead. Mary screamed and cried. John was frightened all of a sudden. The door banged behind them. They turned around. Petrified, Mrs. Robert's silhouette took shape in the doorframe. She wasn't calm anymore. She had become furious and threatening. She had just revealed her real face. She was holding a knife. She was going to kill them. The killer got close to the shaky couple and said with a frightening voice, "Now that you have discovered my secret, I have to kill you. You are going to give your last breath." Hearing that, the young couple screamed and asked for mercy. But it was too late. The psychopath had already stuck her knife into John's heart. Mary desperately caught an axe on a table. Driven by a really brave step, she murdered the mentally ill woman to save her life. Now the whole story was over, however. Her life would never be the same without the love of her life.